The cargo ship shook like a leaf in a storm. Kim Day gripped his safety harness as alarms screamed through the metal corridors. Red lights flashed everywhere, making the walls look like they were bleeding. The 17-year-old boy had never been in a real emergency before. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it over the noise. "Hull breach in Cargo Bay 3, the computer voice announced. "Emergency landing protocols active." Day looked out the small window beside his seat. Planet below grew bigger and bigger. It looked brown and empty, like an old piece of bread left too long in the sun. This was supposed to be a simple supply run to the outer colonies. His father had gotten him the job to teach him responsibility. Now Day wished he had stayed home on Earth. The ship hit the ground with a sound like thunder. Metal screamed against rock. Day felt his body slam against the harness as everything went dark. When he woke up, his head hurt like someone had hit it with a hammer. Smoke filled the air, making him cough. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the twisted walls. Day unbuckled his harness with shaking hands and stood up slowly. His left arm ached, but nothing seemed broken. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" Only silence answered him. Day made his way through the wreckage. The cargo bay doors had been torn open like a giant can opener had ripped through them. Mountains of garbage and refuse that had been heading for deep space disposal were scattered across the alien landscape. Food scraps, broken electronics, metal pieces, and plastic containers covered the ground for hundreds of meters in every direction. The pilot's cabin was empty. Day found a note stuck to the emergency beacon. "Gone for help. Stay with the ship. Captain Lee." But the beacon was smashed, its red light dim and flickering. Day stepped outside into the alien air. It smelled strange, like old flowers and metal. The sky was purple instead of blue, with two small suns hanging low on the horizon. In the distance, rocky hills rose like sleeping giants. Everything felt wrong and lonely. His stomach growled. The ship's food dispenser was broken, sparking and making angry buzzing sounds. Day found some protein bars in the emergency kit and ate one slowly. It tasted like cardboard, but it made his stomach stop hurting. As the alien day passed, Day explored. The crash site, the garbage was everywhere. Rotten vegetables, broken machines, old clothes, empty containers. Back on Earth, people called this kind of work detail garbage duty. It was punishment for bad students. Now this garbage was all he had. The purple sky started to get dark. Strange sounds came from the hills. Howling that sounded almost like singing, but sadder. Day decided to stay close to the ship. He made a small fire using broken electronics and some paper from the cargo. The flames looked orange and normal, which made him feel a little better. On the second day, Day saw them. 3 figures moved carefully between the scattered garbage piles. They walked on 2 legs like humans, but their skin looked green and scaly in the morning light. They were shorter than Day, with long arms that hung down past their knees. Their heads were bigger than human heads, with large eyes that seemed to catch every bit of light. One of them pointed at Day and made a sound like water bubbling over rocks. The others moved closer, but not too close. They seemed as scared of him as he was of them. Day raised his hands slowly, palms open. "Hello," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." The aliens looked at each other. One of them, older than the others with gray patches on her green skin, stepped forward. She made more bubbling sounds and pointed at herself, then at Day, then at the garbage scattered around them. "My name is Day," he said, pointing to himself. "Day." The older alien tried to copy the sound. "Day," she said in a voice like wind through leaves. Then she pointed to herself. "Hiya, Jin." The other 2 came closer. One was younger, maybe Day's age, with bright green skin and curious eyes. "Bye," she said, copying Hyojin's gesture. The third alien was bigger and stronger looking. He kept watching the hills as if something dangerous might come from there. "Bahram," he said quickly, then made more bubbling sounds to HYO-Jin. HYO-Jin nodded and gestured for Day to follow them. She pointed at the scattered garbage, then at herself, then made a motion like she was eating. Her stomach made a loud growling. Sound that Day understood perfectly. These aliens were hungry. Day looked around at all the refuse from his crashed ship. Food scraps rotted in the alien sun. Metal pieces reflected the purple sky. Plastic containers rolled around in the strange wind. To the people back on Earth, this was all worthless trash. But maybe, just maybe, it could be something more. He picked up an empty container and mimed drinking from it. Then he found some food scraps that weren't too rotten and offered them to Hyojin. She sniffed them carefully, then shook her head. The smell was too alien, too different. The three aliens led Day away from the crash site. They walked for an hour across the rocky ground until they reached their village. Small, maybe 30 buildings made from mud and stones. Gardens surrounded each house, but the plants looked sick and yellow. Many of the garden plots were empty, showing only dry, cracked earth. More aliens came out to look at Day. Children hid behind their parents, peeking out with wide, curious eyes. Everyone looked thin, too thin. Their clothes were patched and worn. Their faces showed the kind of tiredness that comes from not having enough. To eat for a long time, Hyojin brought Day to the center of the village, where a circle of stones surrounded a cold fire pit. She pointed at the sick gardens, then at her stomach, then shook her head sadly. She didn't need words to tell Day what was wrong. The village was starving. That night, Day lay on a bed of soft alien grass in a small hut Hyojin had given him. Through the thin walls, he could hear the sound of crying children and worried parents talking in their bubbling language. The two small suns had set, and the alien stars looked nothing like the ones from Earth. Day thought about the mountains of garbage scattered around his crashed ship. Back home, that refuse was heading for the deep space disposal sites.
Oh.
Worthless trash. But looking at the hungry faces around him, Day began to wonder if one person's garbage might be another's salvation. He fell asleep planning impossible things. Day woke up to the sound of children crying. The alien morning light filtered through the thin walls of his hut, casting strange purple shadows across the floor. His body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, but the sound of hungry children made him forget his own discomfort. He stepped outside and saw the village coming to life. The Cathari people moved slowly, like they were walking through thick water. Their movements had the careful, measured pace of people who didn't have energy to waste. Day watched a young alien mother try to comfort her crying child. The little one's ribs showed through his thin skin. Hyojin approached Day with a bowl of thin soup. The liquid was clear with a few floating pieces of something that might have been vegetables. She offered it to him with a gentle smile, but Day could see the effort it took for her to be generous when her own people were starving. "Thank you," Day said, taking the bowl. The soup tasted like water with a hint of something bitter. He drank it slowly, trying not to show how little nutrition it contained. After breakfast, Yunbai came to find him. She was curious about the strange human and seemed to know a few words of galactic common language. Her universal translator was broken, sparking, and making strange noises, but she could communicate basic ideas. "Come," she said, pointing toward the village gardens. "Show you." Day followed her through the settlement. Every house had a small plot of land beside it, but the gardens looked like they were dying. The soil was gray and cracked. Plants that should have been green were yellow and brown. Many had no leaves at all, just bare stems sticking out of the hard ground like broken bones. EU and Dash by knelt beside one of the sickest plants and touched it gently. Before she said, struggling with the words, "green, big, food," she gestured to show how tall and healthy the plants used to be. Now, ... She shook her head sadly. An older alien approached them. He was tall and thin, with deep lines around his eyes. His hands were rough and dirty from working in the soil. Yunbai introduced him as Jamin, the village's best farmer. Jamin spoke to Yunbai in their bubbling language. She translated as best she could. "He says the earth is sick. 3 seasons, no good plants. He tries everything. Old ways from his father's father. Nothing works." Day knelt down and picked up a handful of the gray soil. It felt dry and lifeless in his hands. On Earth, his father had told him stories about the old days before synthetic food, when humans had to grow their own plants. He remembered learning about soil and nutrients in school, though he had never paid much attention at the time. "This dirt needs food," Day said slowly. "Plants eat from the soil. If the soil has no food, plants die." Yuan Bai looked confused. "Dirt eats, not like people eat," Day explained. "But plants need things in the soil, like ... He searched for simple words, like vitamins, like minerals. When plants grow, they take these things from the dirt. After many years, the dirt becomes empty." Jamin listened carefully as Yunbai translated. He nodded and spoke rapidly in their language. Yunbai turned back to Day. He asks, "How do you feed dirt?" That was the question Day had been thinking about since he woke up. On Earth, farmers had solved this problem long ago. They used fertilizers, compost, and crop rotation. But this alien world had none of those things. The Cathari had been farming the same way for generations, and now their traditional methods were failing. "On my world," Day said, "we put old food back into the soil. Dead plants, food scraps, they rot and become dirt food." Jamin looked skeptical. He said something that sounded like a question. "He says they tried that," Yunbai translated. "Old plant pieces, but not enough. Not working." Day spent the morning walking through the village, looking at every garden plot. The problem was worse than he had first thought. The soil wasn't just tired, it was completely depleted. Years of growing the same crops in the same places had stripped away all the nutrients the plants needed. He met more villagers as he explored. There was Teho, a young boy about 10 years old who helped his grandfather tend their small garden. The boy's stomach was swollen from hunger, but he still smiled when he saw Day. There was Saw Young, a middle-aged woman who knew about healing plants, though she had none healthy enough to use for medicine. The village leader Jin Wu was a serious man with gray patches on his green skin. He watched Day with careful eyes, like he was trying to decide if this strange human could be trusted. When Day tried to communicate with him, Jin Wu just nodded politely and walked away by midday. Day had seen enough. The village was dying slowly. The adults were giving most of their food to the children, but even that wasn't enough. In a few weeks, maybe less, the weakest villagers would start to die. The children would be first. But as Day walked back toward the crash site, he began to form an idea. The cargo ship had been carrying tons of refuse to the disposal sites. Food waste, organic materials, even human waste products that the colonies couldn't process. Everything that civilization threw away was now scattered across the alien landscape. What if that garbage could save these people? The afternoon was spent at the crash site sorting through the scattered debris. Day found mountains of food scraps, potato peels, fruit cores, vegetable stems, and expired rations. There were also broken machines with metal parts, plastic containers, and synthetic materials. Most people would see this as a disaster, a mess to be cleaned up. But Day was starting to see it differently. He was seeing raw materials, components, the building blocks of a solution. When he returned to the village that evening, he found Hyojin waiting for him. She had learned a few more words of Galactic Common during the day, and her eyes were full of hope. "You help?" she asked simply. Day looked around at the dying village, at the hungry children, at the empty gardens, and the desperate faces. He thought about the impossible task ahead of him. He had no real farming experience, no proper tools, no guarantee that his crazy plan would work. But he also thought about the mountains of refuse at the crash site, about human ingenuity and the refusal to give up, about the fact that throughout history, humans had found ways to survive and help others survive in the most unlikely circumstances. "Yes," he said, "I will try." That night, Day lay awake planning. He would need to organize the villagers, teach them new methods, turn garbage into garden gold. It seemed impossible, but impossible was just another word for a problem that hadn't been solved yet, and humans were very good at solving problems. Day sat in the village center, surrounded by curious aliens. His broken translator sparked and buzzed, but he had learned enough of their language to communicate basic ideas. Hyojin sat beside him, her old eyes watching his face carefully. Village council had gathered to hear what the strange human boy had to say. Jin-Woo. The village leader crossed his arms and made a doubtful sound. "You think garbage can save us?" he asked through Yunbai's translation. "Not garbage," Day said slowly. "Resources, materials, things your plants need to grow strong." An old warrior named Yujin laughed bitterly. "We have tried everything. Ancestors' ways, ancient songs, sacred rituals. The earth is dead, boy. Dead things cannot be brought back to life." Day stood up and walked to the center of the circle. He had spent all night thinking about how to explain his plan. These people were desperate, but they were also proud. It had survived on this world for thousands of years. It wouldn't easily accept help from an alien child. "May I show you something?" Day asked. HYO-Jin nodded. "Show us." Day picked up a handful of the gray, lifeless soil from one of the dead garden plots. He held it up for everyone to see. "This dirt is hungry, just like you are hungry." The villagers murmured among themselves. Some looked confused. Others looked annoyed. "Dirt doesn't eat," said Sungho, an elderly council member with wise eyes. "You're right," Day agreed. "But plants eat from the dirt. They need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. They need iron, calcium, magnesium. When plants grow, they take these nutrients from the soil. After many years, the soil becomes empty." Yunbai translated carefully. The villagers listened, but Day could see skepticism in their faces. "On my world," Day continued, "we learn to feed the soil. We give it what it needs. Old food scraps become rich fertilizer. Metal pieces provide iron. Organic waste becomes compost." Eugene shook his head. "We've tried putting old plants back in the soil. It doesn't work." "Because you need more than just plant waste," Day explained. "You need variety. You need different types of nutrients. You need to mix them properly and let them decompose in the right way." Jinwoo leaned forward. "And you think the refuse from your crashed ship can provide these nutrients?" "I know it can," Day said with more confidence than he felt, "but I need help. I need people willing to work with me, to try new methods." The council talked among themselves in their bubbling language. Day caught some words: dangerous, foolish, desperate, hope. Finally, Hyojin spoke. "Show us what you mean. If you fail, we are no worse than we are now. If he fails, we waste time we don't have," Hyojin argued. "Time we could spend searching for new hunting grounds or preparing for the final journey." "The final journey?" Day asked. EU and Dashby looked sad. "When village dies, people go to the sacred mountains. They sing the death songs and join the ancestors." Day felt his heart sink. These people weren't just hungry, they were preparing to give up entirely, to die with dignity rather than suffer slow starvation. "Give me 1 month," Day said. 30 days. If I can't show you results by then, I'll help you prepare for whatever you decide to do." The council debated for hours. Some villagers wanted to try Day's plan. Others thought it was foolish to trust an alien child. In the end, it was little Taeho who settled the argument. The hungry boy walked into the center of the circle and tugged on Day's sleeve. "Please try," he whispered. "I don't want to go to the mountains yet." Hyojin wiped tears from her large eyes. "We will try your plan, young human. But we need to see progress quickly. Our children cannot wait long." The next morning, Day led a group of volunteers to the crash site. Yunbai came with him, along with a few other young villagers who were curious about the strange human methods. Even Jamin, the old farmer, decided to join them. The sight of the scattered refuse amazed the aliens. They had never seen so much discarded material in one place. Food scraps, metal pieces, plastic containers, and organic waste covered the ground like a strange, colorful carpet. "Where do we start?" Yunbai asked. Day had been thinking about this all night. "We sort everything into groups. Food waste goes here, metal pieces go there. Organic materials in this pile, plastic containers over there." The work was hard and messy, The villagers wrinkled their noses at the smell of rotting food. They cut their hands on sharp metal pieces. They struggled to understand why Day wanted to save things that seemed completely worthless. Me-na. A young female villager held up a broken electronic device. This is useful. The metal inside is useful, they explained. Copper, iron, aluminum. Plants need these minerals. Her brother Dongwu found a pile of spoiled vegetables. These are too rotten to eat. Perfect for compost, Day said. When organic matter rots, it becomes rich soil food. By the end of the first day, they had sorted the refuse into different piles. Food waste in one area, metal components in another. Organic materials in a third pile. The villagers looked exhausted and confused. Now what? Jamin asked. Now we build, Day said. We create composting systems. We break down metals to extract minerals. We make tools from plastic containers. We turn garbage into garden gold. Yujin had followed them to the crash site. He looked at the sorted piles with obvious doubt. This is your great plan? Is playing with refuse? This is just the beginning, Day said. Wait until you see what we can build with these materials. That evening, back in the village, Day drew pictures in the dirt to explain his ideas. He showed them how to layer organic materials to create compost, how to extract nutrients from metal components, how to build simple irrigation systems from plastic containers. The villagers listened, but he could see the doubt in their eyes. They had tried so many things already. Ancient methods passed down through generations, sacred rituals, prayer, and sacrifice. Nothing had worked. You really think this will save us? Hyojin asked quietly. Day looked around at the dying village, at the hungry children, at the empty gardens. He thought about the impossible task ahead of them, about all the ways his plan could fail. I think it's worth trying, he said. World. We have a saying. The best fertilizer is the gardener's footsteps. It means that the most important ingredient in growing anything is the willingness to keep working, even when success seems impossible. Song-ho smiled at this. We have a similar saying. The river that never stops flowing will eventually carve through the hardest stone. Then we keep flowing, Day said. Keep working. We turn impossible into possible, one step at a time. Yes. The alien night settled over the village. Day felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. 30 days to prove that human ingenuity could save an entire civilization. 30 days to turn garbage into hope. It seemed impossible, but impossible was just another word for a challenge that hadn't been conquered yet. The work began before dawn. Day woke to find Yunbai and Dongwu already waiting outside his hut, ready to start another day of the impossible project. Word had spread through the village overnight and more volunteers had joined their group. Kyung-soo, the village blacksmith, came with his tools. He was a strong alien with arms like tree trunks and hands that could bend metal. Show me how to break these things, he said, pointing at the pile of electronic waste. So Dash Young, the healer, brought her knowledge of plants and soil. I want to understand how dead things can make live things grow, she said. Even some of the doubters came to watch. Yujin stood at the edge of the work area, arms crossed, waiting for the human boy to fail. Day started with the composting system. He showed the villagers how to layer different materials in specific ways. Food scraps went on the bottom, then dry plant matter, then more food waste, then soil, then water. It's like making a sandwich, Day explained. Each layer feeds the layer above it. Bacteria and tiny creatures will eat the old food and turn it into rich soil. Renee wrinkled her nose at the smell. How long does this take? Weeks, Day admitted. Maybe months. But we can make it faster if we do it right. While the compost piles were being built, Day worked with Kung-soo to extract minerals from the metal waste. They built a simple furnace using rocks and scrap metal. The blacksmith was amazed at how much valuable material was hidden inside the broken electronics. Your people throw away more wealth than our entire village has ever seen, Kyun-soo said, holding up a piece of pure copper. We didn't know how to see its value, Day replied. Sometimes the most precious things look like garbage at first. Hardest part was convincing the villagers to trust the process. Jamin, the experienced farmer, watched Day mix rotten vegetables with metal shavings and plastic fragments. "This looks like poisoned soup," Jamin said. "It does," Day agreed. "Plants will love it, trust me." Days passed in back-breaking work. The villagers carried water in plastic containers salvaged from the crash. They built raised garden beds using metal frames and broken machinery. They created irrigation channels using plastic pipes and rubber tubes. Dongwu proved to be naturally good at understanding Day's methods. He helped build a system to grind up organic waste and mix it with soil. "It's like cooking," he said. "But instead of feeding people, we're feeding the earth." The children helped too. Teho and his friends collected small metal pieces and sorted them by type. They carried water and helped mix the compost piles. Their energy gave the adults hope, even when the work seemed endless. But not everyone was convinced. After a week of constant labor with no visible results, some villagers began to complain. "We're wasting our strength on foolishness," said Haewon, an elderly traditionalist. "The ancestors never needed to play with garbage to grow food." "The ancestors lived in different times," Hyojin replied. "When the soil was young and rich, we must adapt or die." Yujin became more vocal in his opposition. "This human boy is leading us to ruin. We should be preparing for the final journey, not chasing impossible dreams." The arguments got worse when the first experimental plots failed completely. Day had tried to rush the process, mixing fresh compost directly into the soil. The plants that were supposed to grow strong and healthy turned black and died within days. "I told you this wouldn't work," Yujin said angrily. "Now we've wasted precious seeds and time." Day stared at the dead plants, his heart sinking. He had been so confident, so sure that his plan would work. But seeing the blackened stems sticking out of the enriched soil made him doubt everything. Undashed, I put her hand on his shoulder. "What went wrong?" "The compost was too fresh," Day said quietly. "Too strong. I burned the plants with nutrients instead." "Of feeding them?" "So we failed?" Mina asked. "No," Day said, though his voice shook. "We learned. The compost needs more time to break down. We need to test the soil before we plant. We need to be more careful." That night, many villagers wanted to quit. They gathered in the village center to debate whether to continue the experiment or abandon it. Ginwoo looked tired and older than his years. "We've lost a week of work and precious seeds. How do we know this won't happen again?" Day stood before the assembly, feeling the weight of their desperate hope and growing doubt. "Because now I know what doesn't work. Every failure teaches us something. On my world, we have scientists who fail hundreds of times before they succeed once. But that one success can change everything. We don't have hundreds of chances, Yujin. We have weeks before the children start dying." "Then we make every day count," Day replied. "We test smaller amounts. We learn faster. We adapt." Hyojin stood up slowly. "I believe in this boy," she said. "Not because his plan is perfect, but because he doesn't give up when things go wrong." "That is the spirit our village needs," Saoyoung agreed. "I've seen the metal nutrients he extracted. I've watched the compost breaking down into rich, dark soil. The science is sound. We just need to be smarter about how we use it." The vote was close, but the village decided to continue. They would give Day 2 more weeks to show real results. The next morning, Day changed his approach completely. Instead of rushing to plant crops, he focused on perfecting the soil preparation process. He tested small samples of compost mixed with different amounts of native soil. He created dozens of tiny experimental plots, each one slightly different. Slowly, carefully, he began to understand the alien soil and what it needed. The breakthrough came when he realized that the local bacteria were different from Earth's bacteria. They needed different conditions to thrive and break down organic matter properly. "We need to feed the tiny creatures in the soil first," he explained to his team. "Once they're healthy and active, they'll help break down our compost safely." It was a race against time, and Day could feel the village's patience running out with each passing day. 3 weeks had passed since Day began his impossible project. The village was quieter now, as if everyone was holding their breath. The children moved more slowly, and even the adults who had been working hardest were beginning to show signs of serious hunger. Day woke each morning with a knot in his stomach. Not from hunger, though he was eating less to save food for the children, but from fear. Fear that his plan wouldn't work in time. Fear that he was giving these people false hope while their strength faded away. He walked to his experimental plots in the early morning light. For days there had been nothing. Dark, rich soil that smelled earthy and alive, but showed no signs of growth. He knelt beside the first test plot and brushed away a thin layer of dirt. His heart stopped. A green shoot pushed through the soil, no bigger than his fingernail. Then he saw another, and another. All across the experimental plot, small plants were emerging from the enriched earth. "Yuanbai," he called, his voice cracking with excitement. "Yuanbai, come quickly." She ran from her family's hut, followed by her parents and several curious neighbors. When she saw the green shoots, her large eyes filled with tears. "They're growing," she whispered. "They're actually growing." Word spread through the village like wildfire. People came running from every direction. Hyojin arrived with her walking stick, moving as fast as her old legs could carry her. Jinwoo and the other council members pushed through the crowd to see for themselves. Even Yujin came, though he tried to hide his curiosity behind a mask of skepticism. "They're very small," he said, but his voice lacked its usual harshness. "Big things start small," they replied. "These plants are growing in soil that has been dead for years. If they can grow here, they can grow anywhere." Jamin knelt beside the plots, examining the soil and the young plants with his experience. "Eyes. This earth," he said softly. "It feels different. It smells different. It's alive again." "How did you do it?" Sa-young asked. Day grinned, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "Bacteria, living things in the soil. They eat the compost and turn it into plant food. But they need the right conditions, the right temperature, the right moisture, the right pH balance." "How sour or bitter the soil is," Day explained. "Plants are picky eaters. They only absorb nutrients. When the soil tastes just right to them." Over the following days, the experimental plots exploded with growth. The vegetables grew faster and healthier than anything the villagers had seen in years. The leaves were deep green and strong. The stems were thick and sturdy. But the real test came when Day expanded the successful method to larger plots. Worked with teams of villagers to prepare bigger areas of soil, mixing carefully measured amounts of processed compost with the native earth. Mina helped him plant the first full-sized garden. "What if it doesn't work on a bigger scale?" she asked. "Then we learn something new and try again," Day said. "But I think it will work. The soil knows what to do now. We just have to give it the right ingredients." The larger plots took longer to show results, but when they did, the growth was spectacular. Plants that had struggled to survive in the old soil now thrived in the nutrient-rich earth. Vegetables grew bigger and faster than the villagers had ever seen. Taiho was the first to taste the new harvest. Day picked a small leafy vegetable from one of the plots and offered it to the hungry boy. Taiho bit into it carefully, his eyes widening with surprise. "It's sweet," he said, "and it makes my mouth feel good." Soon, other children were trying the fresh vegetables. Their parents watched with amazement as color returned to their children's faces. The hollow look of hunger began to fade from their eyes. But the success brought new challenges. The improved farming methods required constant attention and careful monitoring. The soil needed to be tested regularly. The compost had to be managed properly to avoid burning the plants, Day realized. He couldn't do everything himself. He needed to teach the villagers how to maintain the systems he had created. "You must understand the science," he told Jamin. "Not just the steps, but the reasons behind them. Why we mix the compost this way, why we test the soil, why we water." At certain times, the old farmer nodded eagerly. "I want to learn everything. My grandfather's grandfather would be amazed to see plants growing like this." Day began teaching daily lessons to anyone who wanted to learn. He'd showed them how to test soil pH using crushed berries that changed color. He taught them to recognize the signs of healthy soil bacteria. He explained how different plants needed different nutrients. Saw Young proved to be an excellent student. Her knowledge of healing plants helped her understand how soil health affected plant nutrition. It's like medicine, she said. The soil is the patient, and we're giving it what it needs to be healthy. Even some of the skeptics began to change their minds. Eugen watched quietly as the village children played in the growing gardens instead of lying weak and hungry in their beds. I was wrong about you, young human, he admitted to Day one evening. I thought you were giving us false hope, but you've given us real hope, something we can build on. As the experimental plots continued to thrive, Day felt a mixture of pride and worry. The immediate crisis was being solved, but he knew he couldn't stay on this world forever. Eventually, rescue ships would come. The villagers needed to be able to continue this work without him. What happens when you leave? Yunbai asked one day. She had become his closest friend and most dedicated student. You continue the work? Day said. You teach others. You spread these methods to other villages. You make sure no one on your world has to go hungry again. But what if we forget something important? What if we make mistakes? Day smiled. You will make mistakes. That's part of learning. But you'll also make discoveries. You'll find ways to improve these methods. You'll adapt them to your world better than I ever could. He looked around at the thriving gardens, at the children, playing among the green plants, at the adults working with renewed energy and hope. The best gift I can give you isn't just food, he said. It's the knowledge that impossible problems can be solved with determination, creativity, and the willingness to see treasure where others see trash. As the fourth week of the project ended, the village looked completely different. The gardens that had been brown and lifeless now burst with green growth. The air smelled of growing things instead of dust and despair. But Day knew the real test was still coming. The plants were growing, but could they produce enough food to feed the entire village? Would the harvest be successful? And could the villagers maintain these systems on their own? The answers would come soon enough. 3 months had passed since the crash that brought Day to the alien world. The village that had once been preparing for death was now celebrating life. The sound of laughter filled the air as children played among gardens heavy with ripe vegetables. Stood in the center of the village, watching Taeho and his friends race between the thriving plots. The boy who had once been too weak to walk was now full of energy, his cheeks round and healthy. The transformation still amazed Day every time he saw it. The rescue ships will be here soon, Yunbai said, joining him in the garden. She carried a basket full of fresh vegetables, more food than the village used to see in a week. Day nodded, though the thought of leaving filled him with mixed emotions. How do you feel about managing everything without me? Scared, she admitted honestly, but also excited. We've learned so much, and we're not the same people we were 3 months ago. She was right. The entire village had changed. Jamin had become an expert in soil management, teaching other villages the new methods. Soyoung had developed new healing remedies using the nutritious plants they could now grow reliably. Even Eugene had embraced the changes leading work. Teams to expand the successful gardens. Look at this, Dongwu called from across the garden. He held up a vegetable that was twice the size of anything they had grown before the crash. The soil in the new plots is even richer than the experimental ones. Day smiled. The villagers had indeed surpassed his original methods. They had learned to adapt his basic principles to their specific environment and plants. They had discovered local materials that worked even better than some of the ship's refuse. They had become innovators in their own right. Jin-Wu approached with a group of visitors from neighboring villages. Word of the agricultural miracle had spread across the region, and delegations came daily to learn the new methods. These are the representatives from the mountain settlements, Jin-Wu explained. They want to know if our methods will work in higher altitudes with different soil conditions. Day had been training villagers to be teachers and ambassadors. Yunbai and Jamin can show you everything, he told the visitors. They understand the science better than I do now. It was true. The villagers had taken his basic knowledge and expanded it far beyond what he had imagined possible. They had experimented with different composting techniques, discovered new sources of nutrients, and developed sustainable practices that would work for generations. As the day progressed, Day helped with the final preparations for his departure. He had written detailed instructions in both his language and theirs, covering every aspect of the soil improvement process. But more importantly, he had trained a group of villagers who could teach others and continue to innovate. "I have something for you," Hyojin said, approaching with a small wrapped package. Inside was a piece of the native stone, carved with symbols that represented growth, hope, and friendship. "So you remember us when you return to your star." "I could never forget you," Day said, accepting the gift with deep emotion. "You gave me something too. You showed me that the most important technology isn't in machines or computers. It's in the willingness to keep trying when everything seems hopeless." That evening, the entire village gathered for a farewell celebration. The feast was made entirely from vegetables grown in the restored soil. The abundance was overwhelming. More food than the village had seen in years, all grown from what had once been lifeless earth. Children who had been starving just months ago now played games and sang songs. Adults who had been preparing for death now made plans for the future. The transformation was complete. As the alien sun set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Day heard the distant sound of approaching ships. His rescue had finally arrived. Captain Lee was amazed by what he found. "When we lost contact with your ship, we feared the worst," he said. This is incredible. You've created an agricultural revolution." "It wasn't just me," Day said, looking around it. "The thriving village. It was all of us working together." The captain examined the detailed reports Day had prepared. These methods, they could be applied to struggling colonies throughout the sector. "You've solved one of our biggest problems, how to establish sustainable agriculture on new worlds." "Cathari people solved it," Day corrected. "Just help them see that solutions sometimes come from unexpected places." As the rescue ship prepared to depart, representatives from dozens of villages came to say goodbye. They brought gifts of food grown in soil, restored using Day's methods. They promised to continue spreading the knowledge to every settlement on their world. "You saved us," Yujin said, the former skeptic, now one of Day's strongest supporters. "But more than that, you taught us to save ourselves." "And you taught me something too," Day replied. "You taught me that the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or weapons or wealth. It's the refusal to give up on each other." Yunbai was the last to say goodbye. She had tears in her large eyes, but her face was full of determination. "We'll make you proud," she promised. "We'll spread these methods across our entire world. No village will ever face starvation again." "You already make me proud," Day said. "And remember, keep experimenting, keep learning. The methods I taught you are just the beginning. You'll discover things I never could have imagined." As the rescue ship lifted off from the alien world, Day looked down at the village through the small viewport. The lights twinkled like stars among the dark gardens, but he could see the green patches even in the darkness. Life was thriving where death had once waited. Captain Lee joined him at the viewport. "The Colonial Authority is very interested in your report," he said. "They want to implement these sustainable farming protocols throughout the outer colonies." "Good," Day said. "But they need to understand something important. It's not enough to just teach people the techniques. You have to teach them to see potential where others see problems. You have to show them that impossible is just another word for a challenge that hasn't been solved yet." The ship entered hyperspace, carrying them away from Viridian Prime and back toward human space. But Day knew that what had happened on that alien world would ripple outward like waves on a pond. Villages across the Cathari world would learn the new methods. Colonial worlds would implement sustainable farming practices. The refuse that had once been considered worthless garbage would be recognized as valuable resources. Most importantly, people throughout the galaxy would remember the lesson that a human boy and an alien village had taught together, that the greatest solutions often come not from advanced technology, but from the simple human refusal to accept defeat. In his final report, Day wrote, "Recommend that all future colonial missions include agricultural specialists and waste management resources. What we consider garbage may be treasure to others. What seems impossible may simply require a new perspective. The greatest technology we possess is not our machines, but our determination to help others thrive." As the ship carried him home, To Earth, Day smiled and fingered the carved stone in his pocket. Somewhere behind them, an alien world was learning that hunger was not inevitable, that problems could be solved, and that sometimes salvation came from the most unlikely places. The boy from Earth ended a village's hunger with nothing but garbage and grit. But in doing so, he had given them something far more valuable than food. He had given them hope, knowledge, and the unshakable belief that no challenge was too great to overcome, and that, perhaps, was the most human gift of all.